Well, welcome back to another episode of The Compass. I'm here with Dr. Brad Robison. Today, we're talking about parenting and how parenting still matters. Now, Dr. Brad, one of the things that people say is that genes determine everything. And I want to ask you about that, just as a psychiatrist, the whole idea of nature versus nurture. How important is parenting? How important is genetics? And what's that mix?
Yes. I think it's a great topic to talk about in our, current culture. And I mean, I know there's all kinds of concerns in lots of different areas, but, concerns about the increase in mental health diagnoses and medicines and all that. And again, that's a whole different topic to, someday maybe get into. But my thought about it is, yeah, parenting still matters. We have had tremendous growth in neuroscience research and over the last 20 or 30 years. And the brain is the most complex information processing system out there. We haven't even begun to come close to being able to create anything like it. AI, doesn't even come close when you really start getting into the complexities of the brain. And so, yes, we have come to understand a lot about the brain. And we've come to understand a lot about genetics and genetic predispositions and all of those things. But like a lot of things, the more we learn and the deeper you dig in the hole, the deeper it goes. What we've come to understand, years ago when I was first getting into this field, we were really grappling with the neurotransmitter hypothesis about mental health issues. And it's the if we can modulate serotonin neurotransmitters, if we can modulate dopamine neurotransmitters, and we those are important, and we do find those helpful as we've developed medicines that can help really bad things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or various things. But the more we've looked into it, the more we've realized that the neurotransmitter hypothesis just barely scratches the surface of the complexity of the brain. That it's not just about the neurotransmitters, it's about the neural circuitry. And the neural circuitry is very complex, but we are beginning to elucidate it and sort it out. But that also is really interesting because that takes us back from thinking, oh, well, it's about, some genetic disruption in a neurotransmitter system or, and all the genetic predispositions. And there are a lot of genetic predispositions. But even in the complexity that we currently understand, there's something called epigenetics and epigenetic phenomena. It's sort of that nature nurture. It's the way the environment interacts with the genetics and the expression of the genetic code and all of those things. So, we could wander down those paths, but to be more on point for parents that might be watching this, basically it still comes back to the fact that parenting matters. Like the environment that our kids grow up in, the things we do as parents is very important to their development. And it's not just the development of their mind and their social skills and all that, but it's really important to the development of their brain. We're laying down neurotransmitter systems in whole neural pathway systems. There's a there's a Hebb's axiom. A neuroscience researcher. Hebb's axiom is that neurons that fire together wire together is the basic summary of it. And so we got these infants and toddlers and 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds and we're helping them lay down neural pathways in all of our interactions. So yeah, parenting parenting still matters. It's really, really important.
There's a movie right now that's like the most popular movie in the box office called The Accountant 2. It's the second movie in a series about this guy that has autism, and part of the movie is there's this place that people with even severe autism go, and there's like a neuroscientist there that actually turns them into really high performing, high functioning, like super secret agents essentially for the government. This is a really interesting movie, but it kind of makes me ask this question or think about this. Are there, clear examples of traits where parenting input can actually amplify or even dampen those genetic tendencies that you're talking about? Like, as you were saying, hey, there are some epigenetics, these reactions that we have due to our genes, but what are some things that parents can do to either amplify or dampen some of those biological tendencies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not familiar with the movie or the premise of the movie. I don't think that I don't think that we're turning any of my patients that I'm aware of into like super soldiers or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I just spoke with a young man yesterday that I have worked with for years since he was little, and his genetic predispositions would be currently, I guess, Asperger's was what I originally diagnosed him. They kind of changed the terminology. So they would say, autism spectrum or high functioning autism. Definitely had a lot of savant capabilities, just a real, intense ability to focus and memorize things and all of that. And, I think he and his family is a really good example. I mean, great young man, always has been. Some struggles. I mean, they were coming in to see me with great family who, a lot of the families that I work with, one of the first things I talk to them about as we're getting to know one another is I said, okay, guys, parenting matters.
Yeah.
And for my patients, like this young man, I usually say parenting matters. And this isn't parenting 101. Like, if you're going to really have an impact, you got to become, we're talking PhD level, coursework of parenting. Like, you really have to take your job as a parent seriously and really put in the work to figure out what is really going to help your child, and especially if they have special needs. And really, I'd say that's true for any child, really, but this family being an example, man, did they ever do that. They really stepped up and really learned, and they struck that perfect balance. I feel like they weren't the helicopter parents that were over anxious and then making the kid anxious, but they also weren't, overly permissive. I mean, they just struck a really good balance of creating a very nurturing environment with high expectations for this young man. They figured out how to get supports in place. They figured out how to help him learn how to navigate the social world, which didn't come easy to him because of the autism. They figured out how to help him make lots of strides in all of those areas from the time he was little, on. And he's the, finishing up his PhD and is going to be, just the coolest, greatest, quirkiest little professors at some university. I mean, he's just great. I mean, he's just a great guy. I mean, and to me, that's a great example of the biology.
Yeah.
The biology is what it is. And, to date, there's, I don't know, some crazy number, 10,000 genetic variants that have been associated with autism. Like, it's genetically a complex phenomenon. And clearly there's a lot of different things going on with the biology, but once you're there, I mean, for this guy, I mean, it's like, well, his parents don't care about the 10,000 genetic variants. They care about, well, what is my child's biology?
Yeah.
And then what can I do to help them manage and overcome
Yeah.
and deal with and integrate the strengths and weaknesses of their biology, and they did a phenomenal job with him. Yeah.
Is there any advice that kind of runs counter to what you think is best practices, but it's often said? You know how people kind of like throw out this advice and you're like, yeah, they say that, but I don't, it's not, that's
Yeah.
probably not good.
Yeah. I mean, I see the it's not one piece of advice, Tyler, that I see, but there is an answer to that question that I see all the time. And to me, the answer to that question is I see people coming into the office, and it's out there on the internet all the time. You know, you can, I mean, parenting, I mean, you Google parenting or parent, you know, I mean, you're just going to get flooded with stuff. But what I see the struggle with a lot of times is parenting techniques.
Mm,
People confuse parenting techniques with parenting styles.
hmm.
And to me, and there are, I mean, if you get out there and you start really, you know, looking around at some true parenting experts on the internet that have you know, some good credentials and are putting out good information. And there are, I don't have a preference. I don't even have somebody off the top of my head that's somebody that I go to or recommend, but there are. But what you'll find is those people are much more acquainted with some global principles of parenting style, and they
Mm,
don't get so hung up on this technique or that technique. It's not that different. It's not that different than the just, you know, $1 billion diet industry that's out there
yeah.
either. You know, I mean, you know,
It's all
tons of,
silver bullets. Like the silver bullets are not the
yeah,
most effective strategy, but it's
no,
actually learning a set of tools and processes.
yes, exactly. That's probably the biggest thing that I see. And so when it comes to parenting style, I still think now there are probably some more modern modifications of this, but some of the research and work that's been done on parenting for decades has really stood the test of time, and that's that work on, you know, some people are familiar with the terms, but that work on permissive style and the authoritarian style, the two extremes, and then that middle ground approach of the authoritative approach, you know, and those styles, if you're able to really get that balanced authoritative style technique, I mean, a good authoritative parent can use a lot of tools in their tool bag effectively, and kids come out great. You know, kids do well. You know, they grow, they develop, they have great, you know, social emotional development, great brain development, which underlies the social emotional development. You know, even kids with genetic predispositions for inattention, distractibility, anxiety, emotion regulation problems turn out great in the hands of a truly authoritative, you know, just a good, nurturing, authoritative parent. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean that when I say they turn out great, it doesn't mean necessarily that at some point they might not need to come in and see somebody like me, and we might need to do some therapy or talk about some medicines or whatever. But those are just, again, even those interventions are just tools
Yeah.
in the hands of a gifted parenting style, a gifted parent who's using a really good, balanced parenting approach. You
Is
know,
there a way for a parent to kind of track their progress? Because if you think about it, a setback sometimes could feel like detrimental, but really it could be two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to remember or process that. So, like, how do you kind of teach the parent not to get discouraged in this process?
Yeah. Well, one of my standard lines here that just at first sort of deflates the parent, but we laugh about it usually, is when they come in and, well-meaning, loving parents, and they come in, they're like, man, yeah, I've been trying this and we've talked about something and they're implementing it and they're trying it. And I'm like, they come in and they're like, oh, this just isn't working. And I'm like, well, keep doing it for about 18 years and get back with me. So again, then they're just like, oh, great. But I do say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but also like that good authoritative parenting style. You're not going to win every battle, but you're focused on winning the war down the road, and you're going to get there. And a lot of times my job is just encouraging parents to say, yeah, look, I mean, this is a challenging to parent kiddo, but you're doing fine. You're going to get there. And that's worth commenting on too. Now, these are broad general principles, but they are important. And a good thing to comment on too is how the temperament of the child, how the genetics, the temperament, the things that the child has going on interacts with the parenting style. I use my boys. If you know my boys, be gracious to them. They're both great young men. They're doing great. But if you know them at all, you probably know the differences in their temperament. And so, with Garrett, our oldest, he has a more laid back temperament. And so we thought we were rock star parents until Josh came along, and Josh's temperament is more intense. He's got big emotions. He's got big energy. He's got, all those things. Now, I mean, he was a great kid, and he's a great guy, and he's a great dad, and he's doing good things. But I'm just talking about difference in temperament. And what we found was with Garrett, it's like we had a 4-lane highway to go down before we had either our parenting style had drifted and become too permissive or had become too rigid and authoritarian. It was like we had a 4-lane highway to go down. With Josh, because of his temperament, it was more narrow. We had to really pay attention and be, engaged and know, okay, we're getting a little too far this way, or we're getting a little too far this way. We had to really be much more, engaged to find that balance. And that's a lot of the parents that I see here. They're feeling like, oh my goodness, this is hard. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It is, yeah, it is. And, hang in there. And so a lot of times I'm just a coach and a cheerleader for parents. Like it is hard. And, I've had great parents over the years, that have done a great job. I mean, we can all learn to do better, and I do want parents to, I want to encourage parents to be honest with themselves. If they feel like they're off track in their parenting, own it and do something about it, get on track with it.
When you were talking about, like temperament and things like that, that seems a little bit more something you can perceive or pick up. But when you're talking about the epigenetics or genome testing, is there a recommendation you have towards that? I know I did an epigenetics test before, and it kind of gave me a report on, like, I have a higher pain tolerance, or I'm, have a sweet tooth, or kind of all this stuff. Like, is there a version of that you sort of recommend, or are you just speaking more in general terms?
More in general terms. There's interesting things along that are developing, but I don't feel like there's anything that's really like a yeah, you need to go out and spend the money on this, I mean, because the problem is some of those kind of things, insurance don't cover very well. I mean, we do occasionally, and we can do it here at our office. We will do, an oral swab and send off for what's called pharmacogenomic testing, which it, it doesn't really reveal as much as I think sometimes it's marketed as, or I don't know if it's the marketing from the companies or if it's just the general public's kind of way of understanding it, but kind of how I hear it, and people come in through the door sometimes saying, can you do that test that tells you what medicines my kid needs to be on? Well, that test doesn't actually exist. I mean, I know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about the pharmacogenomic testing. And what that testing actually tells you is it gives you an idea of how, based on somebody's genetics, how they're likely to metabolize certain medicines. So some medicines, they may be a rapid metabolizer. Some medicines, they may be a slow metabolizer. There are a few other, genetic markers that will give us some gauges on that. It doesn't actually tell us like, oh yeah, this is the medicine that your child needs to fix this attention problem.
Yeah.
It's not that specific. But and there are other panels being developed for various things that look at some of those genetic markers, and it's interesting. But I don't know, how, like, it does give you some information. I guess is the way to put it. But I don't, if it's something that's not cost effective for you or for your family, it's not a make or break deal in my mind.
The something that I've noticed in Mother's Day's just around the bend,
Yeah.
on 2 days from now, moms seem to give themselves a really hard time, and I would imagine that's even amplified when they're dealing with a child that has biological dispositions or certain diagnoses, and
Yes.
they sort of wear, to me, a lot of times it feels like a false responsibility, but when they're getting phone calls from the school or, in some cases, law enforcement or whatever, and they're like, wow, I can't do anything right. Like, what's your advice? What's your encouragement to those kinds of situations?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great question, and there's layers there. One, I mean, parents love their kids. I mean, parents love their kids. I just take that as a given. I mean, and I probably said on this, some of our conversations before, I don't remember, but Dr. Palmer, emeritus professor of pediatrics at University of Utah, where I trained in peds, he always said that the number one rule of pediatrics is mothers know. And moms know their kid. You gotta listen to the parents. I think dads hopefully know their kids too, but yeah, moms know their kids. You got to listen to the parents. So, but I do think moms, carry a lot of mom guilt. I think that's in some ways getting more instead of less, over time. And I think I would want to reassure parents, both parent moms and dads. I would want to reassure parents that, that you matter. What you're doing is important. Don't overly beat yourself up, but don't put on blinders either.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're struggling as a parent, if you're struggling with your own mental health issues or addiction issues or whatever it is, your parenting is important, and it has a significant impact on your child and how your child, grows and develops. So,
Yeah.
pay attention and do something about it. Get the help you need, you know?
Isn't that wild? Like you're 80 years old and what happened to you when you were 8 or still is impacting your
Yeah.
frame of reference for the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It's fascinating from a neurobiologic standpoint. I was just in a facilitating a small group last night, and we were talking about some of those things. And one of the presenters or one of the participants was talking about some of her story, and this is a well-rounded, highly effective adult parent, great parent, but she was just talking about the fact that she remembers a distinct time where, like at 6 or 7, where a friend who was maybe a year or two younger than her, the person that was telling the story is the youngest of a set of girls. So she had several sisters, and she was the youngest. And this friend that was her friend, but chose to go and play with her older sister instead of play with her.
Yeah.
And again, she said, I realized that it probably wasn't just that event. It probably was maybe growing up as the youngest sibling. She said, my family was overall nurturing. It wasn't anything. But she says, to this day, I still remember thinking, oh, of course, they're not going to choose me. And and she said, for years through her childhood and her teenage years and through some of her dating relationships as a teenage girl, that reverberated in her head for years.
Wow.
For years. And it took some real work to recognize it and to overcome it. So yeah, those things do last. They do. And that's a part of where, to come back to the parenting styles that we didn't define all that well, because there's a ton we could talk about, right? We could talk about parenting things and when parenting goes wrong and things aren't going well, and we could talk about complex trauma and trauma and all of those impacts, but that's a whole other discussion in some ways. But if we go back to the parenting styles, a permissive style is overly permissive, just as it sounds. And the permissive style a lot of times has a lot of rules, but then doesn't follow through consistently with the rules.
Yeah.
The data shows that kids that grow up with that permissive parenting style tend to have significant problems as adolescents and young adults. There's one article years ago that was, the title of the article was called Lonely Gods. The idea that, it's like you grew up thinking the world revolved around you, and then it does, then at some point you hit adolescence and young adult life and realize, oh, what happened? It doesn't really revolve around me. And so struggling with those sort of things. And one of the other things about the permissive style is the parent-child interaction is out of sync. The parent isn't giving consistent boundaries and limits for that child to push up against and for them to develop. And they need that consistency to push up against for their brain to develop and their emotions to develop and all that. And they're not getting that. And then on the other side, the authoritarian, that dictator style, the dictator style is one that's, it's my way or the highway, you do it because I say, and it's this really, really firm limit. But the problem with that style and the firmness of that style is it doesn't articulate it's parenting is about me as the parent and what I want and what I'm dictating and what I'm saying, and I'm not really providing good reflection back to the child about that this is you, that I see you as a child and I see you as unique and different than me, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, and so that's not being accurately reflected. But in that balanced style, that authoritative style, and that balanced style, the parent is firm with high expectations, in charge when they need to be in charge, basic safety, stuff like that, unmoving. It's like the authoritative parent is in charge when they need to be in charge, follows through with consistent limits, has high expectations, but has the ability to nurture the child's self. It's like, it's like a mirror that accurately reflects the child back to the child. It's like, I see you, and I am here to help you develop, you.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's that proverb scripture, train up a child in the way they should go, in their own bent, train them up in the way that they are, who they are.
Yeah.
That's the balanced approach.
And when they're old, they will not depart from it. I heard an analogy one time about parenting style, and it essentially was like, hey, it's kind of like when you get into a roller coaster and they pull the thing down, you want a little room where you can move, but you also want to know that there's a guardrail there or a block there. And that's, I think, adequately describing what, you mentioned is the balanced approach, where there's some flexibility, but there's a boundary, that's there when it needs. Just today, as we're kind of like closing out our segment here, what's one sentence that you'd want parents to remember, after the end of this conversation?
I mean, in some ways, I think what I would want them to remember is kind of how we opened it. I mean, parenting matters. Like, what you're doing matters. We are flooded by experts.
Yeah.
In our society, we are flooded by experts, right? You can either just, dismiss all of the experts, or you can be overwhelmed by all of the experts. And I would say find that, again, just like everything in life, I guess, find that balance and know that you matter. I tell parents that come in to see me, and our nurse practitioners and therapists, I think, do the same thing, and we've talked about it. I tell parents all the time, look, you're the expert in your child. I'm not the expert in your child. You're the expert in your child. I have an expertise in some things that maybe I can come alongside and help you with, but you're the expert in your child. I mean, you are the best therapist your child will ever have. You're the best, you're the expert. And I think that's the take home message for parents. Embrace that, seek out some help to support you in your role so that you can become a better and better expert in your child. That's all great. Yeah.
Well, fascinating conversation. Thank you, as always, Dr. Brad, for your keen insight and just help as we're having this conversation of helping parents navigating parenting. Today, you can learn more about us by calling 573-334-7055 to make an appointment, or visit us on our website, bradrobisonmd.com. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Compass.